Remember that viral dress from 2015? You know, the one that broke the internet because some people saw it as blue and black while others were absolutely convinced it was white and gold? Well, that wasn't just some random internet fight. It opened up one of the most mind-bending questions about consciousness that science is still struggling to answer. What if the red I see in my mind looks completely different from the red you see in yours? Like, maybe my red looks like what you'd call green, but we've both been taught to call it red our whole lives, and we'd never know the difference. Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating questions in philosophy and neuroscience, one that might completely change how you see the world around you. Let's talk about something we all experience but can never truly share, our subjective experience of color. Every day, we see thousands of colors. We name them, we use them to describe things, we make decisions based on them. But here's the wild thing. I have absolutely no way of knowing if what I experience as blue when I look at the sky is anything like what you experience. Sure, we both call it blue, but that doesn't mean we're seeing the same thing in our minds. What makes this question so captivating is that it sits at the intersection of science, philosophy, language, and culture. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore how our eyes and brains actually perceive color, look at some fascinating philosophical thought experiments, see how different cultures experience color differently, and ultimately ask what this all means for how we understand reality itself. And this isn't just some abstract scientific curiosity. It gets at the heart of how we experience the world and connect with each other. So let's dive in. Let's start with the basics. How do our eyes actually work when it comes to seeing color? Inside your retina, that's the light-sensitive layer at the back of your eye, you have these specialized cells called cones. Most people have 3 types of cones, each sensitive to different wavelengths of light, roughly corresponding to red, green, and blue. When light hits these cones, they send signals to your brain, which combines this information to create the full spectrum of colors you experience. But here's where it gets interesting. Different creatures see completely different color worlds. Take the mantis shrimp. This little underwater superhero has 16 different types of color receptors compared to our measly 3. They can see ultraviolet light, infrared light, and colors we can't even imagine because our brains literally don't have the hardware to process them. Just try to wrap your head around that. There are colors out there that you will never ever be able to see or even imagine. And even among humans, there's huge variation. Color blindness is probably the most familiar example. About 8% of men have some form of color vision deficiency, where certain colors look identical or get confused. If you're red-green colorblind, a red apple and a green leaf might look much more similar than they do to someone with typical vision. But there's an even wilder variation in the other direction. Some women have a genetic condition called tetrachromacy, where they have 4 types of cone cells instead of 3. These tetrachromats can potentially perceive up to 100 million different colors, compared to the roughly 1 million colors most of us see. Imagine walking through the world and seeing dozens of distinct shades where most people just see blue. That's their reality. And even among people with normal color vision, recent research has found significant variations in how we perceive color. The peak sensitivity of your red cones might be slightly different from mine, meaning we literally see slightly different versions of red. But vision isn't just about the eyes. Your brain plays an enormous role in constructing your experience of color. The visual cortex takes those signals from your retina and interprets them based on context, memory, and expectations. That's why optical illusions can trick us so effectively. They exploit the shortcuts and assumptions our brain makes when processing visual information. Think about it. Color isn't actually a property of objects themselves. That red apple isn't inherently red. It's just reflecting light waves of a particular wavelength while absorbing others. Color as we experience it only exists in our minds. And this gets to the heart of our question. If color is created in our minds, and our minds are all separate, how can we know we're creating the same experience? Now that we understand how our eyes and brains process color, let's explore the fascinating philosophical problem this creates. This brings us to one of philosophy's most intriguing thought experiments, the inverted spectrum. Imagine if what I see as red, you see as green, and what I see as green, you see as red. But we've both been taught to call red things red and green things green. So when we look at a stoplight, we both say the top light is red and the bottom is green, but our actual subjective experiences are completely different. The mind-bending part is that there would be absolutely no way to detect this difference. We'd go through our entire lives using the same color words in all the right situations, never realizing that what's happening in our minds is completely different. This is sometimes called the problem of qualia, the subjective, internal experience that can't be directly observed from the outside. This is directly related to what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of why physical processes in our brain give rise to subjective experiences at all. We can map exactly what happens when light hits your retina and trace the neural signals all the way to your visual cortex, but none of that explains why you have a subjective experience of redness. It's like trying to explain what chocolate tastes like to someone who's never tasted it. You can describe the chemical composition, you can explain how taste buds work, but none of that conveys the actual experience of tasting chocolate. Have you ever wondered why your favorite color appeals to you? Is it something inherent in the color itself, or something unique about your perception? Could your experience of your favorite color be completely different from how I would experience it? While we can't directly compare our subjective experiences, there is some fascinating evidence suggesting our color perceptions might not be completely different after all. One intriguing piece of evidence comes from looking at how different cultures categorize colors. In the 1960s, researchers Berlin and Kay conducted a famous study examining color terms across many different languages. They found that while languages differ in how many color terms they have, there are surprising patterns in how these terms develop. For instance, if a language only has 2 color terms, they're always dark and light. If it has 3, the third is always red, and languages seem to add terms in a fairly consistent order. This suggests that there might be something universal about how humans perceive and categorize the color spectrum. Even if our languages divided up differently, our brains might be organizing color experience in similar ways across cultures. There's also interesting research on emotional and psychological responses to colors. Studies suggest that certain colors tend to evoke similar emotional responses across different populations. Red often increases alertness and can stimulate appetite. Blue tends to have calming effects. The wavelength of light might be affecting our nervous systems in consistent ways. But there's a catch here. These responses could be learned rather than inherent. Maybe red makes us alert because we associate it with fire, blood, and stop signs, not because of something fundamental about the experience of redness itself. Now let's explore how culture and language shape our perception of color in remarkable ways. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests language doesn't just label our experiences, it actually shapes them. For example, the Himba people in Namibia have fewer distinct terms for what we would call blue, but many more terms for different shades of green than English does. And when tested, they can quickly distinguish between shades of green that look identical to most English speakers, but struggle to tell apart blues that seem obviously different to us. Their language has literally shaped what differences they can easily perceive. There's also evidence that our perception of color has changed throughout history. When you read ancient texts, you find some really strange color descriptions. Homer's Odyssey famously describes the sea as wine dark rather than blue. Ancient Greek texts rarely mention blue at all. Some historians believe that blue was one of the last colors to get a distinct name in many languages, and they wonder if people actually perceived it differently before they had a specific word for it. Our cultural background also influences what we associate with different colors. In Western cultures, white often symbolizes purity and is worn at weddings, while in many Eastern cultures, white is associated with mourning and funerals. Red signifies good luck in China, but can represent danger or warning in other cultures. With these cultural influences in mind, let's now turn to the deeper philosophical implications of our color perception differences. The color question ultimately points to what philosophers call the explanatory gap. the difficulty in explaining how physical brain processes create subjective experiences. Some philosophers, known as physicalists, believe that consciousness is entirely explainable through physical processes, and that eventually neuroscience will explain everything about our subjective experiences. Others, particularly dualists, believe there's something about consciousness that can't be reduced to physical processes alone. This is one of the most mind-bending questions about consciousness that science is still struggling to answer. It raises profound questions about the nature of reality itself. If our subjective experiences can differ so dramatically, can we really say we're experiencing the same reality? Could technology someday bridge the gap between our subjective experiences? Maybe. We can already use brain imaging to roughly recreate what someone is seeing, but that's reconstructing the image, not the experience of seeing it. The gap between knowing which neurons fire when you see red and knowing what redness feels like to you remains enormous. And here's a thought-provoking question. If we could somehow directly share our experiences, if I could momentarily experience colors exactly as you do, how would it change our understanding of reality? Would we discover that we've been seeing the world similarly all along, or would we be shocked by how differently we each experience it? This understanding has real-world applications beyond philosophy. From designing inclusive websites for people with color vision deficiencies, to understanding cultural color preferences in global marketing campaigns, awareness of perceptual differences matters. Think about art and design. Artists and designers make assumptions about how colors will affect viewers. But if we all see colors differently, those effects might vary wildly from person to person. This awareness of perceptual differences should increase our empathy and understanding. Next time someone describes something in a way that doesn't match your perception, remember that they might literally be seeing a different world than you are. It's also crucial for accessibility design. When creating interfaces, websites, or public spaces, designers need to consider the full range of color perception, including color blindness and other variations. Next time you argue with someone about whether something is blue or green, remember, you might both be right in your own perceptual worlds. The color exists in your mind, not in the object itself. So where does this leave us? The question of whether we see the same colors remains unanswered, and might be fundamentally unanswerable. But exploring it reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness and the subjective worlds we each inhabit. We walk through life assuming we all experience the same reality, but the truth is that each of us lives in our own perceptual universe, constructed by our unique brains and shaped by our individual experiences and cultural backgrounds. And I think there's something beautiful about that mystery. The idea that even something as seemingly simple as color contains depths we may never fully plumb. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Share in the comments something you've always wondered, whether it's about philosophy, science, or any interesting topic, and maybe we'll cover it in the next video. And if you found this exploration of perception and consciousness interesting, hit that subscribe button for more interesting videos that explore the mysteries of our reality. Until next time, keep questioning what you see, because reality might be even more fascinating than it appears.